require you to be addressed, and that's what I hope to address and to set the table for the leaders' meet, which will be happening in India, I think this month, if I'm not mistaken.
Does the administration believe your NATO allies are cowards?
That what?
Does the administration still believe that your NATO allies are
Well,
cowards?
the president's he's been very disappointed. Understand that there are many countries in NATO that agree with us that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, that Iran is a threat to the world, and said, fine, I'll do something about it. He's not asking them to recruit, he's asking to set in, but they refuse to do it. So I think the president looks at that and says, hold on a second, if all these countries around the world agree with us that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, that this regime is a threat to world peace and security, that already have missiles that can reach Europe, they don't have missiles that can reach America yet, but they have missiles that can reach Europe. Step forward and do something, and everyone go. Yeah, I think we're very upset at the
the shutting of the Strait of Hormuz. Can the U.S. provide more energy itself?
We want energy as Obama. Obviously, I think we're at his level. We want a bigger part of their portfolio. We also think there's opportunities with Venezuelan oil. In fact, it's my understanding that the interim president of Venezuela will be traveling to India next week as well. So there's opportunities. There's a lot to work on with India. They're a great ally, a great partner. We do a lot of good work with them. And so it is an important trip. I'm glad we're able to do it because I think there'll be a lot for us to talk about. And we'll also meet with a Quad there, which is important. I think my first meeting as Secretary of State was with the Quad. So I believe I got sworn in, I did the thing in the lobby, and then I went right upstairs, and that was my first meeting. And I'm glad we're now, and we're going to do one later.
Some negotiations, media suggesting that the U.S. proposals close some of the gaps, or is potentially closing gaps.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get ahead of this. I think we've made some progress, but obviously we're dealing with a system that itself is a little fractured. So the Iranian system, and so, but there'll be a couple visits. I understand. I believe the Pakistanis will be to Iran today. That'll advance. We can't get a good deal. The president's been clear. He has other options. I'm not going to elaborate on what those are, but everybody knows what those are. But his preference is always a deal. His preference is always an agreement. Always diplomacy. So there's good time, but I don't want to be really optimistic. Let it happen.
How do you intend to get Raul to the United States?
Well, our country and before turned an indictment of Raul Castro with us. The evidence is clear. He shot down gave the order to shoot down civilian airplanes.
And how will you get him here?
Well, I'm not going to talk about how we're going to get him here. If we were trying to get him here, why would I say to the media what our plans are about that? I know you have to ask, but why would I answer that? The bottom line, there's a lot. At that point, he becomes a fugitive of American justice. And, well, if there's an announcement, we'll tell you afterwards, not before. Okay, a couple more, and I got to get on.
Still have conversations with Raul Castro's grandson, or
look, we remain. Here's the problem we have. We'll engage with the Cubans. We have. Our ambassadors met with them recently. The CIA director was down there a few weeks ago. There's some State Department communications that occur. I just don't see a lot of. At the end of the day, they got to make a decision. Their system doesn't work, right? Their economic system does not work. It's broken, and you can't fix it with the current political system.
Hello and welcome to another episode of What's the Beat. And this is a program where we basically go over the biggest international stories, or the stories that I think make the most amount of sense to talk about. Right now, of course, in the world, you have a lot to speak on. You have a lot to speak on in terms of what's going on in Turkey. We have upcoming conferences in Ankara next week. We also have, of course, as well, the Lebanon and Israeli deal that's going to be finalized next week as well, with a presentation in front of the Pentagon. And it's a lot of things to get into, a lot of things we have to discuss. But I think today I want to discuss more of what Marco Rubio said there, and that is about Iran and the negotiations that are coming up. Now, for this, I'm going to switch to our browser just so you can have a better understanding of what we are talking about here. So, Marco Rubio is presently on a mission, not only against his homeland in terms of Cuba, but also he's on a mission to also tackle the issue of Iran, like the US administration is generally. The issue that he has to talk about, of course, as the Secretary of State, which is the effective Foreign Affairs Minister for the United States, is that he has to discuss also the negotiations that are taking place. Now, the negotiations that are taking place are going through Islamabad, that's well known. And these negotiations are one thing that is becoming a sticking point every single time it's spoken about, because from every perspective, it doesn't look like we're going to get close to a deal. The reason we're not going to possibly get close to a deal is because the Trump administration is quite hard line on what it wants from the Iranians. It wants specific things, particularly as it relates to nuclear. Now, the one thing to note about Iran is that they are a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which means that they are a signatory to a treaty that allows them the inalienable right, as Article 4 states, for them to essentially go about and get nuclear for civil purposes, for their own local means. This, of course, is not being appreciated by the Trump administration. They are arguing, of course, that while Iran is saying one thing, it's not a surety that they won't go against that line in the future. And for the Trump administration, what they've been trying to get at with the narrative is that this is something that is both coming from not only the perspective of what is going on internally, but it's also something that is required for the future of the United States. There have been many talks from the President of the United States, Donald Trump, where he said that previous presidents should have had taken this role. I'm gonna take a sip of my tea, just a moment. So he talks about how the United States should have been enacting this for the past couple of years. And maybe he's right. Maybe from his perspective, given the reality of what Iran is trying to do in terms of bolstering themselves, we must understand they're one of the most sanctioned nations on the country, but on the planet. But at the same time, they're also one of the nations with a burgeoning economy. If they did not have these sanctions placed upon them, they could probably run roughshod over most of the Middle East. But because of the sanctions, their oil is restricted, their trade is restricted, the money that they have is also restricted. Numerous times, the Treasury of the United States will release statements stating that they are going after more assets of the Islamic Republic. So this is not something that can just be walked away and talked about as if though it is something that is irrelevant. These are words of individuals that hold power, and individuals that hold significant enough power to affect change. And another person that spoke today or yesterday was Trump. Now, Donald Trump has been speaking also about the deal, and he's been speaking about the nuclear aspect here as well. I can't continue for too long, but I do want to get into this. What he's saying there about the nuclear deal is that basically not only will they be getting the uranium, they're going to be removing the uranium, and they're not going to need it as well, which is a weird thing to say for the President of the United States, given the fact that uranium enriched especially is one of the most coveted commodities on earth. There is not much you can get better than that, because at the end of the day, what we must understand is we can trade gold, we can trade diamonds, we cannot trade uranium. We can't. These types of minerals, these types of commodities, they are not easily accessible. And the Trump administration is also playing a dangerous game, because at the same time, while they're saying that they want all these things, they're also saying that these things that are being uranium enriched is not something that actually exists. It's more like dust due to Operation Midnight Hammer last year. Now, Operation Midnight Hammer has also been taking big effect, because Operation Midnight Hammer has been one of the crucial reasons behind why the United States and Israel, or not the United States and Iran, can't really get into much of a discussion. Now, Operation Midnight Hammer, I'm just going to go to Google for this, began on Sunday, 22nd of June, 2025, and it was a coordinated attempt by the United States and Israel to strike at Iran. The issue, however, with the strike is that it was happening while they were engaged in basically conversations, I think, about nuclear as well at the time. So negotiations were happening there as well. So that set the precedent. And then at the same time, this year in 2026, you now have the same thing happening with Operation Epic Fury, that began because the United States preemptively believed that Iran had the capacity, or was working towards the capacity, to attack its assets and allies in the region. And those allies were, at the first time in the State of the Union address, noted to be individuals that were, or countries that were in the European states. So this is also why Marco Rubio continuously states that from their perspective, it's odd that nobody wants to support an initiative that basically mainly supports their allies rather than themselves. It's a weird thing for him to say, given the fact that, again, he's doing this in a very precarious time for most of his allies. If we look at the reality of the European Union, we see that individuals like Sir Keir Starmer are dealing with the Mandelson scandal. Not only that, they have their own issues internally because Sir Keir Starmer is also dealing with the barriers of being the Labour leader, while at the same time being the leader in a time of crisis, because his party basically is getting hit left, right, and center with the energy crisis, and at the same time, again, having to fight the battle of reform. And reform is, of course, also taking a lot of the, let's say, reform is taking a lot of the votes. And even if they're not taking a lot of the votes, they are creating division good enough to lower the ranking of Labour, which is already low given the Mandelson scandal. On the other end, you have Giorgia Meloni, that wants to, in many ways, not really condemn the attacks, but at the same time faces internal pressure from her country to make a decision there as well. And then on the other end, you also have the fact that Giorgia Meloni was called out by the President of the United States in an Italian publication, Corriere della Sera, I think it's called, I think it's Corriere della Sera, yeah, Corriere della Sera. This was after he made the comments as well about the the Pope Father, that being Pope Leo. So Trump was against Pope Leo and his words against nuclear, and that prompted Georgia to defend the Pope because, of course, it's the Pope and this is Italy and she's the Prime Minister of Italy. What were we expecting? But anyway, that's kind of the roughing up of what's going on in the world right now. It's a really short video, but that's mainly because of a lot of other different reasons, but also because we're going to be having another video special tomorrow. We're going to try to get 2 videos out with the live stream, more organized, more coordinated. But I want to thank you all for being here and having this experience with me. So hoping you have a beautiful evening, a beautiful martial art day going further, and that you are all blessed for what you have to do for the upcoming weekend, because it's going to be a ball of a time, and I'll try to keep you updated as best I can. But for now, assalamu alaikum.